So, January 3rd, 2022. A verdict comes down that marks the final, just spectacular collapse of a Silicon Valley superstar. We're talking about Elizabeth Holmes, the woman once hailed as the next Steve Jobs, and on this day she was found guilty of defrauding investors. But here's the thing. This wasn't just a business that failed. It was a lie that put thousands of patients at real risk. So how did a celebrated visionary end up as a convicted felon? Let's break it down.
To really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this, we have to go back to 2014. At its absolute peak, Holmes' company Theranos was valued at a staggering $9 billion. It promised nothing less than a complete revolution in healthcare, and believe me, some of the world's most powerful people, names you would definitely recognize, were lining up to invest. But just 4 years later, by 2018, poof. That $9 billion had completely evaporated. The company was worthless, its labs were shut down, and its so-called visionary founder was looking at federal criminal charges.
So how on earth did this happen? I mean, how did a 19-year-old Stanford dropout build a multi-billion-dollar company on technology that never even worked? And maybe the bigger question is, how did she manage to fool some of the smartest, most powerful people on the planet for over a decade?
Okay, so it all started back in 2003. Elizabeth Holmes, just a 19-year-old student at Stanford, decides to drop out. Why? To found a company called Theranos, a mix of therapy and diagnosis. And her vision? It was simple, but absolutely world-changing.
The promise was just immense, and you can see why right here. On the left, you've got the old way. You know the drill, a painful draw, multiple vials of blood, it's expensive, and then that long, anxious wait for the results. But on the right, that was the Theranos dream. Run hundreds of tests, from cancer to diabetes, with just a single, painless drop of blood from your fingertip. Fast, cheap, and for everyone.
And that's exactly why everyone was so desperate to believe it. The idea wasn't just a good one. It was supposed to democratize healthcare, empower patients, save lives. I mean, who wouldn't want to get in on that? The only problem was, it was only ever an idea.
So, behind all those inspiring magazine covers and that grand vision, the reality inside Theranos was a very different story. It was a carefully guarded and, frankly, dangerous secret. The technology, the magic that was supposed to power everything, it just didn't exist.
This little black box was the centerpiece of the whole deception. It was called the Edison machine. Holmes claimed this device, which he liked to compare to a home printer, could run that full menu of over 200 blood tests from that single drop of blood. This was the magic box that was going to change the world.
But the reality? Oh, it was a complete disaster. The Edison machines could barely do a dozen tests, and even the results they did give were wildly unreliable. The tech was immature, it was never, ever verified by outside experts, and it failed its own internal quality control checks over and over again. The magic box was a dud.
So, you're probably wondering, how did they produce any results at all? Well, this is the real heart of the fraud. To hide the fact that their machine didn't work, Theranos would secretly run patient blood samples on standard, off-the-shelf machines from companies like Siemens, the very same technology they claimed they were making obsolete. They were just faking it.
And this wasn't just a financial lie, it had terrifying real-world consequences. A report from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services came out with this absolutely chilling conclusion. Patients were getting inaccurate results, being told they might have cancer when they didn't, or worse, that they were perfectly healthy when they were actually sick.
So how was this secret kept under wraps for so long? Well, Holmes and her partner, Sunny Balwani, they built this toxic culture of fear and paranoia. Any employee who dared to raise doubts about the technology was threatened with lawsuits or just fired on the spot. It was an environment designed from the ground up to suppress the truth.
Which of course raises the next huge question. With all these problems, how did so many smart people get fooled? The answer, it turns out, is a masterclass in manipulating image, narrative, and exploiting the weaknesses of Silicon Valley's whole investment culture.
First off, Holmes crafted the perfect persona. She started wearing the black turtleneck uniform just like her idol, Steve Jobs. She didn't talk about profits. She talked about a mission to change the world. And then there was the voice. She affected this deep, commanding voice that just projected authority and confidence. She wasn't selling a product, she was selling a story, and herself as the hero. A huge part of the deception was who was supposed to be watching over all this. Our board was stacked with political heavyweights. We're talking former secretaries of state, retired generals, major industry titans. But look closely. Notice who's missing? Yeah, there were pretty much no medical experts, no scientists, nobody with the technical chops to actually check if the technology was real.
And that lack of due diligence, it wasn't just limited to the board. It was the investors too. They were lured in by this star founder effect and probably a huge fear of missing out on the next big thing. So some of the wealthiest families and savviest investors in the world, the Waltons, the DeVos family, Rupert Murdoch, they poured in hundreds of millions. They were investing in the story, not the science.
But a lie this big, it can't stay hidden forever. And thanks to a few very brave people who risked everything, the truth finally started to come out. Let's take a look at how this whole empire finally came crashing down.
The real heroes of this story are former employees like Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz. Despite intense pressure, threats, and harassment from Theranos, they took what they knew to a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carrieru, and he's the one who finally brought the whole scam into the light.
And once that first story broke in October 2015, the collapse was incredibly fast. As you can see on this timeline, it was just a rapid downward spiral. Federal investigations were launched, huge partnerships were dissolved, and by 2018, the company that was once worth $9 billion had to shut down completely. This all led to a guilty verdict in 2022, and Holmes finally reporting to prison in May 2023 to start her sentence.
For her role in orchestrating one of the biggest, most brazen frauds in Silicon Valley history, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison.
So what do we take away from this whole cautionary tale? Well, first, charisma is definitely not competence. Second, a really powerful story can blind even the smartest people to some very obvious red flags. And maybe most importantly, that famous Silicon Valley mantra of fake it till you make it, it has catastrophic and incredibly dangerous limits when you're dealing with people's actual health.
And that kind of leaves us with the big question at the heart of the Theranos saga. In a culture that is constantly chasing the next billion-dollar unicorn startup, who's actually responsible for making sure the so-called magic is real before all the damage is done? Is it the investors, the board, the regulators, or is it the founders themselves? That's the billion-dollar question that's still hanging in the air.